Father Jerry Hayes. I think you all know me. I'm still learning your names. I'll be here a year, I think, August 1st. But that's okay. A lot of familiar faces. Thank you. I'll be singing later, so I hope you stick around. I just want to welcome you real briefly because I know Tom has a lot of material for us. And I just want to welcome him. So I thank you for coming to this summer adult faith formation event. But it's my great pleasure really to welcome you here as we gather, I think, for this very special presentation. We're honored to have Tom Reese with us. He celebrated Eucharist with us just a few minutes ago, and we're thrilled to have him come and share some of his wisdom. Father Reese brings with him a great wealth of insight and experience, particularly in his long service observing and reporting the life of the Church. Today, he's going to be sharing with us his unique perspective and personal reflections on one of the most significant events in the Catholic world, this papal conclave that we were all watching so closely this past spring. We're grateful to have him here with us and for the opportunity to hear from someone who has not only followed the Church all these years, we were decades, I'm just going to say decades, okay? But also who continues to help us make sense of the Church's journey with clarity, with honesty, and with faith. And so without me going on, I want to introduce Father Tom Reese back to St. Ignatius.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's really a joy to come back to St. Ignatius. I always, really enjoy celebrating the Eucharist with all of you and being supported by such a wonderful parish staff and the musicians and everybody. It just makes celebrating the Eucharist a joy. And I especially want to thank Jerry for all he did in organizing this, preparing it, and hosting me. And I especially want to thank him too for his kindness to my brother. He's been really just there for both of us during my brother's sickness. So thanks, Jerry. You're just wonderful. So I always laugh when people introduce me as an expert on conclave. It's true, this is my third conclave. They finally elected a pope that's younger than I am, which means it may be my last conclave. But in any case, so I'm this expert on the conclave, and I remember prior to the last conclave that elected Francis, I said there are two absolutes in terms of papal elections. First, they will never elect a Jesuit pope. Number two, they will never elect an American pope. So that's the kind of experts you're getting. So here we go. I think my talk is kind of organized over, three parts. First, kind of the legacy of Pope Francis. Second, the conclave itself. And then third, what are we expecting from Leo? From the first time Pope Francis stepped out on that balcony in the simple white cassock and said, "Buenos Aires," to the people of Rome, we knew we had something different. On the other hand, to be perfectly honest with you, most of us Jesuits were terrified because his reputation among Latin American Jesuits was very, very bad. He had been a very authoritarian provincial when he was in office. He was known to be against liberation theology. So all of these things made us very nervous. But we had kind of lost contact with him once he became a bishop and the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And we really were absolutely delighted and surprised by him and by who he had become. It's a lesson to us all to not write people off, and to be open to growth and growth in other people. And that's certainly the story of Pope Francis. He, coming after John Paul and Benedict, presented a very different style of being Pope. Very pastoral, very personal, very compassionate. He exuded this kind of he was very smart, but he was not an academic, as was John Paul and especially, of course, Benedict. They sounded like academics. Francis really never sounded like an academic. I used to joke that when Pope Benedict was elected, they elected the smartest man in the room. And I said, that's always a mistake. You should elect the man who listens to all the other smart people in the room. And I think what we got with Pope Francis was someone who listened, someone who, in his very first synod, told the bishops at the synod, speak with boldness. Don't be afraid to say something people don't like. He said that because when he was put in charge of one of the earlier synods, all the curial cardinals came up and told him what people could not discuss, what could not be said. And he did not like that at all. So he came and told the bishops at the synod to speak boldly, say whatever. Now, you may have gotten a little more than he wanted from some of the bishops who then proceeded to criticize him during his pontificate. But that's okay. I mean, he was never intimidated by that. So it was a different style of being Pope. And his priorities were different. He had a very pastoral approach. The way professors say it, he was more interested in orthopraxis than orthodoxy. In other words, he was more interested in how you practice your faith than whether you knew the catechism by heart and could answer all the questions in the catechism. So he was very, concerned about how people lived the Christian faith, especially in terms of how they treated one another, especially the marginalized, the suffering. And so his priorities as a pastor were compassion towards sinners, compassion towards everybody who felt alienated by the church, whether it was divorced, whether it was gays, whoever it was. He said, the church just welcomes everybody. I can get the Latin, the Italian, tutti, 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 everybody, is welcome. His political priorities were also slightly different. It was stress on social justice. He got a lot of people mad at him when he said in one of his interviews, that he was not going to obsess over abortion, gay marriage, and some other gender things. He says, the church's teaching is clear. I don't have to repeat it every day. But he felt he did have to repeat the church's concern about justice, the poor, the migrant. And so, the migrants coming to Europe and dying and drowning in the Mediterranean was a priority. And so he had his first visit to the boot of Italy, where migrants had drowned and washed up on shore. He also made a priority about dealing with the environment, climate change. Now, Benedict had started that, but he went full throttle on it. So we see these things. And he had a great strength in his pastoral style, his pastoral concern. That was always formed in the front of his mind. Now, he had weaknesses, too. He really never cleaned up the Vatican. He tried. He called them to conversion. I would have fired them. But, he was a pastor. And so, and some of the financial issues are still there that need to be taken care of. So these are things that are going to have to be dealt with by his successor. His great strength was in reforming the synod, bringing lay people into it, giving them a vote, his stress on synodality, on bringing people together to pray first, and then to listen to everybody. And then only after you pray and listen to everyone, then you start a discussion. And the whole spirit of the synod around these small tables, I had followed synods for years, and bishops came with prepared talks, they read them, everybody fell asleep, and they had nothing to do with what the person said before or after them. It was one after another. It was awful. But the thing they loved about the synods in the past was when they got into small groups and had discussion. Well, that was the central piece. He made that the priority, and the speeches were kind of sidelined at the synod. And it was really, everybody there, I would say 99% of the participants loved it and thought it was great. They did make a number of recommendations, and like many officials, Pope Francis put them in committees to report back on these recommendations, the ones he didn't want to deal with. And they were supposed to report in June, but of course, he's not here anymore. So Leo said, okay, I'll give you another 6 months. He didn't want to deal with them either. So at the end of this year, those little packages that Pope Francis left on Leo's desk are going to blow up on him. Things like, well, what do we do with women deacons? And some of the other issues that were left by the Synod. So that is kind of the context for, when he gets sick and dies. I mean, clearly people knew he was sick. And the politicking for the next pope begins before the pope dies. That doesn't shock you. But we're a human institution. So cardinals start talking to one another, and of course once he dies, all the cardinals fly to Rome for his funeral. And then, which was on April 26th, he died on April 21st. And within 5 to 20 days after a pope dies, they have to have a conclave. This is a very quick, schedule. And during that time, before the conclave, they meet in what's called general congregations. Boring. Where each cardinal gets 5 minutes to get up and say what he thinks is important for the next pope to deal with. Pope Francis, and of course, they all go over 5 minutes. The red light blinks, they ignore it. And nobody wants to cut them off because he might get elected. Or I might need his vote for my candidate for pope, or for me. So nobody's going to cut him off, and they just, go droning on. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, made a hit at the congregation because he got up and went boom, 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 and sat down after 4 minutes. He sat down early. Boy, did everybody notice that. How to make an impression. And in any case, at this, everybody got up and talked. Nobody gave any great talks. But over coffee, that's when all the real stuff happens. And over dinners and, into the night conversations when they talk about, who do you think? What do you think? I think this guy'd be great, And then the rumors just start escalating, especially from the Italian media. You think the American media is bad. God help you if you have to depend on the Italian media for truth. Much of it is creative fiction. And of course, it's the Italians who are the front runners. And they talk about every Italian who they think, and of course, depending on what side of the political spectrum or ecclesial spectrum they're on, they're all saying, this is the man who's going to get elected pope, blah, blah, blah. And so it's always, the front runners are always Italians. Well, being a social science, I want to look at the data. And in point of fact, Pope Francis cut the percentage of Italian cardinals from, I think it was 20%. He cut it in half. They were only 10% of the vote in the conclave. So they weren't as strong as people thought they were. It used to be in the old days, if you had the Italians and the cardinals and the curia, if they were united, it was a shoo-in. The trouble was they've not been united in a long time, which is why Francis got elected, why John Paul got elected, now Benedict got elected, because they were all behind him. Going into the conclave, it's really, you can ask me about the movie later. Going into the conclave, it is really a time of prayer, especially when they are in the Sistine Chapel doing the actual voting. They start in the evening. They go to the Pauline Chapel, they pray the office, and then they march into the Sistine Chapel and they close the doors behind them and lock them. Conclave means conclave, locked with a key. They are locked inside the Vatican. They are isolated from everything. No cell phones, no internet, no newspapers, no radio, no television, nothing. They're totally locked out from outside communication once they walk into the Sistine Chapel and lock the doors. There in the Sistine Chapel is a time of prayer. They do a number of things like promise to keep secret everything that happens, and then that evening they have one vote. And of course, if they elect the Pope, white smoke goes up the chimney. They rarely elect the Pope on the first ballot. And so we get black smoke coming up the first evening. And so then they're free, they're out of the Sistine Chapel. And remember, at this conclave, we had more cardinals than have ever been in a conclave, because we had 135 cardinal electors. That's cardinals who are under the age of 80. You're too bad if your birthday happened the day before the Pope died. If it was the day the Pope died, you're okay, we'll sneak you in. But after, if you're 80 years or older, you cannot attend a conclave. So there were 135 under the age of 80. I think there was one sick, so it ended up being 134 in the conclave. So after they voted, they left. Okay, go for dinner. There, no more silence. They can talk. They can meet in each other's rooms. They can walk around the Vatican gardens. This is where the real politics happens. So what are they looking for? I think there's three things that each cardinal elector is looking for in a papal candidate. Number one, will he make a good pope? Now, what does that actually mean? Does he agree with me? It's like every other voter, on the issues that face the church. Okay, does he think what's important is what I think is important? And so, you talk to him, you listen, and all that, you try and find out what he thinks. And you listen to his friends and what they say, So, will he make a good pope? Number two, do I have a personal relationship with him? Or does he listen to me? Have you ever been at a cocktail party where you're talking to someone and they see someone more important over and, come in and they just dump you and go and talk to the more important person? Well, if he does that to you, you're not going to vote for him. Does he really listen? And one of the things they said about Leo was, this is a guy who listens. Everybody said that about him. He listens a lot more than he talks. So he had a good relationship with people. And people, you know, cardinals had all met him because Pope Francis had appointed him as head of the Congregation for Bishops, which is it's the committee, the office in the Vatican that deals with bishops. So every bishop has to go meet with him, talk with him, and especially the cardinals all. And if you want an auxiliary bishop, or you want somebody to be your successor, that's the office that deals with it. So he's really plugged in after 2 years of being in that office. And he was multilingual, you know, Spanish. He's pretty good in English, you know, for Chicago. French, Italian. He had spent 12 years in Rome as the superior, they don't call him that, prior, superior prior of the Augustinians. So he could talk to practically everybody. His German's not that good, but Germans, they're so smart. You know all the languages you can talk to them. Most of the developing world knows either English or French. So, he was able to communicate and talk to everybody. And they liked him. So, there was all this conversation and politicking is going on. Now, but despite all that, his name was not at the top of anybody's list. If he had been an Italian, he would have been at the top of everybody's list. With his experience as a diocesan bishop in Peru, with his experience working in the Vatican, all of that would have made him prime candidate. But everybody thought, like I did, that not a chance. Why did we think that? Well, my thinking was that the developing world would have said, if an American got elected, well, the CIA fixed the election. Or Wall Street bought the election. And historically, the church has not given the papacy to a superpower. You know, which is one reason the Italians always got it. But, like when there was the Holy Roman Empire, no, you don't get the Pope from that. The one time a superpower got the papacy, that was France. And what did they do? They took it to Avignon. And it took, I forget, 70 years to get it back. So they didn't want it, going off to Mar-a-Lago. But where I and all the experts were wrong was the Latin Americans did not see him as a gringo. The Latin American bishops did not see him as a gringo. They saw him as someone who may have been born in the United States, but his heart was in Peru. He had spent 20 years as a priest in Peru. I forget how many, 4 or something, as a bishop in Peru. And so he was thought of as one of their own. In fact, I think the bishops in Peru had actually elected him as president of their bishops' conference. He had become a citizen. He's a dual citizen. He had become a citizen of Peru while he was there. And he thought he was going to spend the rest of his life there. So what happens after a few years as bishop, and he was surprised when Pope Francis made him bishop, because they had had some conversations before where they had had some disagreements. And he said, well, now I don't have to worry about becoming a bishop. And then he sent him off to be bishop in Peru. And then he brought him back and gave him what is, I consider, the most important job in the Vatican, and that's vetting candidates who are going to become bishops. I always felt that this was another one of Francis's mistakes. He left in office Cardinal Willett, who had been appointed by Benedict. I mean, you don't want, when you come in, you want the guy who's going to hire everybody. You want to make sure he's part of your team and knows he's going to do what you want and find the people you need. Anyway, he finally did with Prevost. So this was another indication that, hey, Francis liked this guy. So certainly the progressives, this, you know, and when the Latin American cardinals came united behind Prevost, he exceeded expectations. You know how during presidential primaries they talk about expectations. You may lose the primary, but if you get more votes than anybody thought you would, you suddenly get people's attention. And then, so what happened was, on the first vote, he got more votes than people expected because they'd all been reading the Italian newspapers. And, you know, but, you know, all those Latin American cardinals came in united behind him because, let's face it, they knew they were not going to get another Latin American, not after Francis. So they figured this is the guy to back. And the American cardinals, who didn't have a clue what was going on, looked around and went, oh, Prevost, he's an American. Maybe we should vote for him. And the other, you know, and other people looked, oh, I remember Prevost. I went and visited him in his office, and he really listened to me. Hey, you know, and he was able to speak to me in my own language. Hey, yeah, he's a nice guy. I like him. You know, he's not pushy, you know. He'd be good. And Francis liked him. Yeah, okay. And so on the next morning, they had 2 more votes. And every time, he gained some votes. This is, you know, because as people recognize, okay, my candidate's not going to make it. Forget him. Now, who's my alternative? Well, I really hate that guy. I'm going to vote for Prevost, you know, or whatever was the rationale behind people. So, you know, in the morning, 2 more votes, he kept gaining, and the first vote in the afternoon, bingo, he got his 2/3 vote and was elected. Now, the white smoke goes up. I'm sitting in the press room, and all of us experts in the press room had said that if it's a quick election, it's going to be Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, because there's nobody else who has, you know, that kind of support. They're going to go for continuity. They're going to go for Parolin experience, somebody with that, you know, blah, 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 blah. So the white smokes go up. All the Italians scream, Parolin, Parolin! And we go running out into St. Peter's Square, which is right next to the press office, is right there. And out comes the announcement, Roberto. And then everybody panicked. They thought it was Cardinal Sarah, Robert Sarah. And, but in any case, they kept going in Prevost, and everyone, what? And of course, we all screamed, an American, American. And everybody rushed back into the press room to file their stories about how the man was elected who they always knew was going to be the next so anyway, that's kind of how it happened. And then he comes out on the balcony. And I looked and I said, where did that red cape come from? I thought it had been put away. Where was this big, you know, stole come from? He was all dressed up like Benedict. He didn't have the red shoes, but, you know, he was dressed up like Benedict. And we didn't get Buenos Aires. He came out and everybody cheered. And somebody, you know, handed him a prepared speech. It was not off-the-cuff speech. So I watched this and, okay. And then I listened to what he said. And my conclusion was, well, he may dress like Benedict, but he talks like Francis. He said all the right things about synodality, about discernment, about peace. His first words were peace, peace, peace. And about the poor and all that. So That all looked very good. And he has continued to do that ever since. He has praised Pope Francis. He has spoken well of him. He has spoken of the same concerns as Francis: peace in Ukraine, peace in Gaza, concern for migrants, concern for refugees, concern for economic justice, concern for the environment. They have a new mass now that he celebrated on the environment. So he's continuing, I think, all of the policies of Pope Francis. But to be honest with you, I don't think we're going to know who this guy is for 6 months to a year. Frankly, I didn't know who Pope Francis was for 6 months until he had that interview in America magazine. And I went, wow! And we had that first synod, and where I saw he was really very different from his predecessors. Right now, it's really the conservative Catholics like him, progressive Catholics like him. Conservative Catholics think he agrees with them. After all, he dresses like Pope Benedict. And the traditional Latin Mass, people think he's going to bring back the policies of Benedict on the Latin Mass. Progressive love him because he's saying all the right things about peace, justice, the environment, synodality, discernment, involvement of the laity. His track record is very positive. I mean, clearly Francis liked him. He, as head of the Congregation for Bishops, there's a committee of cardinals and a few bishops who meet almost once a week to talk about the candidates that are nominated and sent to Rome by the nuncios in countries around the world. Prevost put on that committee lay people and a lay woman on that committee. That is historic. This is the kind of thing, and of course these were things that Francis was, gradually doing during his pontificate, opening the door and sneaking people in to these various positions. The head of the equivalent of the governor of the state of the Vatican is a woman. Top people in the office of the synod are women. The head of the Congregation for Religious is a woman now. All of these kinds of positions which were opened by Francis, and the fact that Prevost was totally on board with bringing a woman onto that congregation to be part of the discussion about, who should become a bishop is, I think, noteworthy. So we will see where he goes. Everybody who knows him personally loves him. All the, he was elected to be the head of the Augustinians, the religious order that he belongs to a 6-year term, and he did so well that he was reelected. Jesuits don't do that. We elect them once, and we're stuck with them, whether we like them or not. But they liked him and actually reelected him. So he served for 12 years. He visited like 47 countries before he became Pope, the most traveled Pope in history before he became Pope. So it's going to be fun to watch him and see where he goes. I think I'll end there and open it up for questions. Gary?
Questions?
I watch YouTube a lot, and I keep hearing things about what the Pope is going to do, and I wonder if they're accurate. One was he was going to sell off all the silver and gold of the Vatican except for 30%, that he was going to sell real estate because Jesus said feed the poor when people criticized him. Is that being made up or is that true?
Don't believe anything you hear on the internet. I mean, these are people who are trying to get followers so they can sell advertising and make money. So you get all these grandiose things. You know, we're going to have, and it's going to get worse with AI, because we're going to see the Pope actually talking and saying these things when it's not really him. You know, there's a famous AI photo of Pope Francis in a big puffy white jacket. He looks great, except it's not him. You know, so we have to be really careful now with what we read and what we hear on the internet with regards to the Pope. You know, there's a few good sources of information on what's actually going on. America Magazine has an outstanding reporter, Jerry O'Connell, and you know, you can go and online to americamedia.org and find his column in which he reports on what happens in the Vatican. The National Catholic Reporter has excellent service, Vatican reporters. My own organization, Religion News Service, we have a wonderful woman in Rome who covers the Vatican, Claire, and she's just terrific, and you can see her columns at religionnews.com. So these, and if you're of a more conservative bent, the National Catholic Register. My liberal friends don't like it at all, but they do have some good news coverage. It's the opinion columnists that are bonkers. Their news people are fairly good. So those are the sources I would trust. I wouldn't trust YouTube. I would never trust Twitter. I would never, those sources. So those are the best sources of news on what's happening. Now, of course, there's also the official Vatican News site. So just type in Vatican News, I forget what, VA, something like that. They have their own domain name, VA. So, go there and you'll get lots of news about what the Pope is doing. You can hear him speak, his own things. Those are the places I go to for information.
I have read in the mainline press that he's very anti-AI, very wary of AI. How strong a position do you think this will become in his pontificate?
Yeah, I wouldn't classify him as anti-AI. He's actually, this is something that Pope Francis started, actually. Pope Francis, we saw AI coming. And one of the, just as there was the Industrial Revolution during the papacy of Leo XIII during the 19th century, Pope Leo XIV believes that we are headed towards a new AI revolution that's going to change culture, going to change the economy, going to change the world. And the church, just as we developed Catholic social teaching in the 19th century to deal with the new economic reality of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, so too, at the beginning of the 20th century, we should be thinking about AI and its impact on the world, because it's going to have impact on people. So what does it do in terms of affecting culture? What does it do in terms of affecting jobs? I mean, we see this with people very concerned about, them, their jobs as writers, as anything. It's gonna, customer service people, you're never gonna get a customer service person on the phone again. You're gonna get AI. Okay, all those jobs are gone. Coders, they're being replaced by AI. Now, we saw this in the Industrial Revolution, how the economy changed. It's going to change now. I don't know how it's going to change. But the point that both Francis and I think Leo is going to bring to this discussion is ethical values must guide how we use AI. It's got to be used for the common good. It's got to be used to help the poor. It's got to be used for justice, for peace. If AI is just used to make billionaires richer, then that is not the Catholic way. The Catholic way is that any kind of technology should serve the common good. And so now Francis actually was able to bring to Rome for the first time people from Silicon Valley, from Microsoft and Google and these other groups to come and actually, okay, let's talk about this. And the Vatican actually, even under Pope Francis, issued a statement on AI, on the need for ethical values and to use it for the common good. And I think, this is a whole new opening field, and I think basically what Leo says, we need to be on top of this. We need theologians, we need ethicists, we need lay people, we need people with expertise in technology and AI to come together and talk about it, and not just simply ask the question, how can I make money with this? If that's the only question we're asking, then we're not asking a Christian question.
I know you mentioned we won't really know him for a year, and that conservatives like him and progressives like him. What are you hearing? Do you have any hunches about, will he be a unifier?
Yes, I think he is trying to be a unifier. I think he very much is doing that. I mean, I can't think of a smarter move than coming out dressed like Benedict and speaking like Francis. I mean, I'm not sure anybody advised him to do that, but if they did, the Democrats should hire him. I really think he's going to continue the policies of Pope Francis. He's not going to be shocking or surprising like Francis could be. I mean, Francis could be asked a question on an airplane like, what do you think about gay people or gay priests or whatever? And his answer was, who am I to judge? Well, my God, the front page of every newspaper in the world. And the conservatives all saying, it's your job to judge. He was trying to make the point that Jesus called us to compassion towards one another. And we're all sinners. We're all seeking God's mercy and compassion. So I don't think you're going to see that. He's going to be, when he speaks, every comma is going to be in place. The words are all going to be diagrammable. He's going to be very careful. I think he's going to listen to everybody. But I've also heard from the Augustinians that he makes firm decisions. If he makes a decision, he's going to stick to it. So he's not going to be pushed around. But I think he's going to take his time doing it. But certainly at the end of this year, when all those reports come in from the Synod committees and are made public, then the question is, okay, what's next? And he's going to have to decide some things. We'll also see, for example, his former job as head of the Congregation of Bishops is empty. He's got a vacancy there. Well, he's got to appoint someone to take that position. And who he picks is going to be very important. It's going to be somebody he trusts and somebody he can work with, because he knows that job very well after having done it for 2 years. So I think we'll gradually get hints of who he is and what he's doing. He's clearly going to be ecumenical and interreligious. His first trip is going to be to Turkey, to Nicaea, because I think I got it wrong at last. I think it's 1700 years since the Council of Nicaea. So he'll meet with the Patriarch of Constantinople, the head Orthodox primate in at Nicaea and that. So that's, he's going to be doing those kinds of things. And I think as he does, more and more will reveal. He might, no, nobody has said this, so don't quote me. The other anniversary that's happening right now is the anniversary of the United Nations, the founding of the United Nations, which was actually here in San Francisco. Remember, Paul VI's first trip to the United States was to the United Nations in New York. He was not coming to visit the United States, he was coming to visit the United Nations. So I think a lot of people would hope that he might come to that anniversary and then fly over to Chicago for a World Series game.
I wasn't expecting a Sunday morning comedy act, and I want to know if Saturday Night Live has reached out to you.
I was on the Colbert Show one time, but I was like a deer in front of headlights.
Father, could you comment on his political skills? He had to navigate Fujimori per Efia in Peru, and he did used to tweet some comments critical of American political figures. I'm interested in what you think he might do with liberation theology. And finally, I think it's interesting that so soon into his papacy, he has offered to try to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. I'm not sure that will go anywhere, but I think it's interesting that he has offered that prospect.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, he was, he did live in very dangerous times in Peru. First with the rebel / terrorists that were giving a bad time. And I know of Jesuits who were working in villages, and people would come and say, "It's time for you to leave." And, "Oh, no, I'm going to stay here." "No, Father, it's time for you to leave now." And they're told, if you either leave now or you're going to be dead. And so it was people working in those areas. It was tough and very dangerous. And he was working at that time. As a bishop, he continued to do that. And then when Fujimori was president, again, had to operate under a guy who kind of got elected, but then kind of suspended things, decided he wanted to stay in office forever. So he at that time, he was very active. He was leading parishioners in demonstrations, calling for a return to democracy. Now it's true, his Twitter feed, he never really expressed his own opinions, but he did retweet some things that were critical of the Trump administration. His family is divided. He has one brother who's a MAGA, and another brother who won't talk about politics, but is probably much more progressive. No pope wants to get in a spitting match with the President of the United States. But they're going to be made very clear on issues like migration, about taking care of the poor, and encourage the bishops here in the United States to act on those issues. So, for example, he has been supportive of the Catholic bishops when they were critical of the big, beautiful bill and what it did to Medicaid, what it did to USAID, what it did to food stamps, helping the poor, and taking all that money and giving it to the rich. This is not what's supported by Catholic social teaching, and he very much supported the bishops. The U.S. bishops are a bit divided. you had, the official position of the Bishops' Conference was, we like these things in the bill, namely your defunding Planned Parenthood, your defunding any abortion, your defunding gender transition, et cetera, those things. But, and that was a very short part of the letter. Then the rest of the letter was a very detailed critique of the cuts in social policies that were being done in the bill. There's another group of bishops who, now in the USCCB, never took a position on the bill as a whole. There was another group of bishops, who people refer to as the Francis bishops, who joined with other religious leaders in saying, vote no, telling Congress to vote no on the bill. Didn't do much good, but they did say that. So I would say he's supportive. He like Francis, is very supportive of bishops. On the peace stuff, the Vatican has a very good professional diplomatic service. And they have always been willing to be a host. They avoid the word mediator. They're a host for talks. As a neutral place where people can come and talk. If both sides want that. They're not going to oppose it. They're just saying, hey, we're here. I mean, it was what a photo. After Francis's funeral, we see the President of Ukraine and the President of the United States sitting in two chairs in the middle of St. Peter's having a conversation after the funeral. And somebody got the picture, and it flashed around the world. I mean, so, and the Vatican has been successful in getting negotiation for exchange of prisoners. That has happened, and is working on getting the children that are in Russia returned to Ukraine, the Ukrainian children that got caught up in the war, and having them returned to Ukraine rather than adopted by Russian parents. So they've been very active, a lot of it in the back rooms, but and of course the same thing with Gaza and with Israel, of trying to get ceasefire, trying to get food in there, trying to get the parties to speak. So the Vatican, he's going to be totally consistent with Francis on that, so that they do whatever they can. But what can you do? You can just keep talking and calling for this, but you can't force anything. Oh, sure.
So, Francis was a Jesuit. We know the Jesuits. Leo is an Augustinian, and we don't know them. Who are the Augustinians, and why did he choose the name Leo?
Okay, sure. The Augustinians are, a very old order. St. Augustine, when he was bishop in North Africa, even before he was a bishop, he gathered people around. He liked being in a community. He liked being with people who he could talk to about Christianity, talk to about his faith, pray together, share a life together. So when he became bishop, he didn't want to give that up. So he did this. And then they kind of said, well, I guess we should get organized. Why don't you write up some rules for us? So very short, not very long, rules that he set up for this community. And this was way before any other religious orders were founded. Before Benedict, before Dominic, before Ignatius. So it's a very, and all of the people who came after him, the first thing they did is, where's Augustine's rules? We're going to write rules, so let's see what he said first. So we all plagiarized and used some of it. But the stress in what the Augustinians is on community, it's on prayer, and it's on mission. And so these are very important to him and to the Augustinian priest. And they're not a large order, they're much smaller than the Jesuits, but they are all over the world. Like I said, 47 countries that he visited in order to visit the Augustinians in different parts of the world. Leo, why did he pick the name Leo? I think I mentioned that, well, again, I think he was smart. If he became Francis II, all the conservatives would have immediately written him off. If he'd become Benedict XVII, or John Paul III, and so he went back to the guy who was the founder of Catholic social teaching to stress how important that is, Leo XIII, and became Leo XIV. And as I said, he believed that Leo XIII lived at a crucial time in world history, the Industrial Revolution. And he believes that we are now entering a crucial time with the AI revolution. And so he wants to be the Leo XIII for the 21st century. Yes?
My Father Tom, my name is Francisco. Thank you for sharing everything so far. What caught my attention was you mentioned something about Pope Francis and how he was like a practitioner and living the way of Jesus. I noticed that a lot of people, Catholics, all forms of Christian in this country all over, claim to want to feed the poor, help the hungry, the stranger, by showing up to church and preaching. But when it comes out to policies and things that take place, it doesn't seem to mirror, what Jesus' teachings are. So how do we address those individuals who claim to be Christian and walk the life of Jesus, but don't seem to, do it in practice?
With gentleness and care. I think the first thing we have to do again is listen to people. If you grab someone by the throat and say, that's not gonna work. We have to listen. Why do you think that? What are your concerns? What do you think we should do? How should we live out the story of the Good Samaritan? Ask questions. Don't preach. Of course, I preach all the time. That's my job. I think the first thing we have to do is listen and have conversation. I think that was something that Francis taught us about, with synodality. That first, hey, let's get together to pray. Let's get together to talk about Jesus and what role he has in my life, how he's influenced my life, why he's important to me. All of those kinds of things, I think, is where we start. We don't start with, the big, beautiful bill. That as soon as you say those words, you're going to have people yelling at each other. It's going to sound like, a panel on cable news. So I think, we have to listen to each other with charity and with compassion. And then say, well, this is my experience, and this is the way I feel we should do it. I think, if we do it that way, I think we slowly begin to find out that we have a lot more in common than we have that divides us. And that we can find ways of getting together. The problem, of course, with the news media system that we have today is one group of people listens to Fox News, one group of people listens to MSNBC, and the same thing on Twitter. And the algorithms feed you back to the people, to the sources that you agree with, so they just keep reinforcing. And that's why, I like to listen to some people who, are more conservative than myself. I've gotten to know David French, who's an evangelical conservative, did a lot of legal work on stuff, freedom of speech and religion and all that. very smart, impressive. The same thing with David Brooks. I mean, we had, it was wonderful when we had E.J. Dionne and David Brooks or people like that on PBS. Intelligent liberals and intelligent conservatives, rather than the knee-jerk, screaming idiots that make up most of the cable news today. So I think that's where we have. I think, we as a church need to model for the rest of the country how we should get along with each other. We should, they will know we are Christians by our love, remember? And I think if we can model that in a synodal, discerning, prayerful way, then I think we can make a huge contribution to American society.
So the Chinese for decades have insisted on selecting their own bishops for the Vatican. And it seems to me that the church cannot continue to allow that. How will our new pope deal with that issue?
Yeah, that's a real toughie. There have been a lot of people have been very critical of Pope Francis and his conversations and dialogue with the Chinese government on the appointment of bishops in China. The criticism has been that he's given in to the Chinese so often, and that he ought to just tell them, we're not going to do that. Well, the way I kind of understand it and explain it is, the church in this position, the Pope in this position, it's like trying to negotiate with someone with a gun and hostages, and you have no police backup. All you are is the negotiator. There's not a SWAT squad behind you to move in if things get out of control. They got the guns. So, and not only can they threaten you, which they don't really bother to do, you're not, but, if they can threaten the Christians in your country. One Vatican official told me, he was in charge of the relations with Vietnam at the time, and he said, the Vietnam ambassador would come over. I don't think he was an ambassador, but representative would come in and say, yeah, you can get up and you can condemn us and you'll get headlines for 2 days, but next week I'll still be here. Or we can talk, the same criticisms were aimed at the Vatican in dealing with Cuba and in dealing with Vietnam. Well, the situation of the church in Cuba today is just hugely better than it was under Castro. But the Vatican never cut off diplomatic relations with Cuba. The United States did, but the Vatican never did. And it continued in Vietnam. I mean, these countries were throwing people in jail, shooting them, doing everything. And the situation in Vietnam and Cuba are much better today. There's very little interference in pastoral work today. If you get up in the pulpit and denounce the government, you're going to be in trouble. Or you lead a demonstration against some company that's polluting the river that has paid off the local politicians, you're going to be in trouble. But, if you're just doing pastoral work, they'll leave you alone. They don't care. They used to be atheists. Now all they believe in is money. And, the hope is that China someday will evolve, and it's not going to be next year. It's not going to probably be in 5 years. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? I mean, the Vatican's got to look for the long perspective. In point of fact, what they have been able to do is a number of the bishops who were appointed or elected under Chinese supervision have pledged their fidelity to the Pope. So, and frankly, some of them pledged their fidelity to the Pope secretly, even before they were made a bishop, and, or sometime when they're traveling outside the country. So there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't know about. But the Vatican has also gotten some of the appointments that they wanted. There's conversations about, you're not going to win them all, probably, but, it's, you don't walk, the Vatican does not believe in walking away from the table, walking away from dialogue, walking away from discussion. That's for people who grandstand in Washington and are running for re-election. The Vatican isn't running for re-election, so they can do these things. Nobody's asked me about the movie.
I'm aware our collective blood sugar is dropping in the room. I'm going to give you one more question, Tom.
You mentioned at the outset that Francis had some weaknesses, which led to him not being well suited to deal with certain problems in the church. Does Leo have, do you see strengths that Leo has that will make him better suited to deal with some of those?
That's
and the one you mentioned specifically was church finances.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that, and I think some of the cardinals in the conclave were thinking about this very thing also. I think the fact that he has experienced 2 years of working in the Vatican and 12 years of living in Rome, he knows the Vatican much better. He knows the Vatican Curia, the bureaucracy. He knows it much better than Francis did when Francis was elected. Francis never worked in the Curia. Whenever he came to Rome, he got out of there as fast as he could. Francis he was critical of the Curia personnel. He felt they acted like princes, and they did. But he said it to them. He made them put away all their gold crosses and their all the fancy stuff. I think he alienated some of the people in the Vatican. And now Leo comes in and his first speech to the Curia, oh, you're nice people, you're good, you're very devoted. We need to work on some things, but, it was more, that kind of speech. I think there's also a hope that he's an American. Aren't the Americans all business people and managers? Don't they all know this is the thing they're supposed to be good at? And he had run the Augustinians, so he knows that kind of role too. So I think there's hope that he could bring some American expertise in management and in finance into the Vatican. There's a lot of people that have in the U.S. who have offered to do that or willing to do that. And also, it costs money. It costs money to save money. And Francis was a penny pincher. The Vatican Bank is the one place in the Vatican that has the best economic record right now. It has been cleaned up. It cost $1 million to clean up the Vatican Bank. Forensic accountants are not cheap. You know, you can't get your cousin, that would be practice in Italy, to come in and do all this and be in charge. You know, you got to pay competitive salaries if you're going to get top people to come in and work on these things. Because, you know, they can just walk away and get a much better, higher paying job. Now, you can, you know, there are some devoted people who will do that, or have made enough money that, okay, I can do this now. But you can't run an organization on that. So, you know, I don't know how many millions of dollars he needs to clean up the Vatican. They have a large real estate holdings in Rome and around the world. Are they getting the most money out of the rents and the leases and stuff? How many cousins and nephews are living in some of these places, apartments, and not paying rent? Or, you know, this needs to be, you know, cleaned up. And, you know, the same thing. Okay, I remember a finance guy in Archdiocese of Louisiana who would tell me stories. The pastor would come in and say, "Oh, you know, one of the laymen in our parish, he's given us a wonderful deal to repave the parking lot." And his response was, "Oh, that's wonderful. Now let's get 2 other bids to show how generous he is." And, you know, so, you know, competitive bidding for things in the Vatican, you know, in Rome you hire your cousin or your nephew because you know they won't cheat you too badly because they would be embarrassed at family gatherings. This is, you know, again, no way to run a store. So getting those kinds of things in place. Cardinal Sciocca, when he was there, did that. I mean, he brought that American thing to the Vatican, but they, after a while, they got rid of him and put the Italians back in charge. There was one time when John Paul II had cleared out all the Italians and given the top jobs to non-Italians, all the financial offices. But you know, under Benedict, they all, and at the end of John Paul's, when he got sick, they all just came in and took over again. So it's, it just needs better management. There, you know, I'll tell you my 2 things that they need, well, a couple things they need to do. First of all, they should not make anybody working in the Vatican a bishop or a cardinal. They should be civil servants. That can be, you know, so when the new pope comes in, thank you for your service, Father, Monsignor, go to your bishop and get it reassigned. What do you do with an archbishop? Well, what do you do with a Cardinal Burke? You going to reappoint him to some poor diocese? What are you going to do with these people that, you know, you want to move out? And Francis was just too nice to them. You know, a classic case was Cardinal Sarah, who I mentioned earlier. Very good bishop in his diocese in Africa, but then he came to Rome and he's clearly very, very conservative. Well, the office that he was in charge of was merged with another office. That was what Francis tried to do. He merged a bunch of offices, trying to downsize them. Well, so what do you do with Cardinal Sarah now? Well, the person who was in charge of liturgy, Office for Divine Worship, is retiring. Well, we'll give him his job. What a disaster. This guy wanted to bring back the Latin Mass. You know, all of this kind of stuff. Just an utter disaster as head of the Congregation for Divine Worship. You know, and Francis did this. So nothing good was going to come out of that office. You know, now they have a new person in charge, English speaker. I hope and pray we can get a decent translation of the Eucharistic prayers and stuff, the Missal, what we have right now. So anyway, I'm losing track of where I am. Leo. I'm hoping you're praying because he knows English. He'll know what a bad translation we're using at Mass today. And bring in the new, well, the one that was approved, but the Ratzinger veto. Love to see that happen. Hopefully that kind of thing. I was expecting a question on the movie. Quickly on the movie, I loved it, watched it twice. It was pretty good at showing the ceremonies, you know, the way they voted, the way they sit in the Sistine Chapel, you know, they were able to, I don't know, all that AGI stuff, you know, make it look like they were actually there and stuff. So that was all great. In fact, the costumes were better than the Vatican's. If you look carefully and know, the red of the cardinals was a much deeper red. What they actually wear is more of an orange red. Yuck. So Hollywood did a better job of costuming the cardinals than the church did. There were two things that were really off. The first was, and I try not to spoil the ending, but there's a cardinal who shows up, a man who shows up, a bishop who shows up, and has a piece of paper saying he had been appointed a cardinal in pectore. In other words, secretly he was appointed a cardinal, and says, "Here's my paper, let me in." And they did, they let him in. No! Canon law makes very clear the announcement of a cardinal has to be publicly proclaimed by the Pope and with other cardinals present. If he was secretly appointed, he does not get into the conclave. Now, you who have seen the movie know that this really matters. Whether this guy is in the conclave. The second thing, which it just is scandalous and really upset me, was the dean of the College of Cardinals, who is portrayed as this really good guy, and he was a good guy. But he hears the confession of this sister, and then proceeds to go tell one of the other cardinals what the sister said. Now, every grammar school Catholic knows that's a no-no. That is a mortal sin. That is an excommunicatable offense, which can only be lifted by the Pope. You know, so that was just awful and terrible to have that, and somebody should have not, made sure that they didn't have that. Otherwise, the movie was a lot of fun. Clearly, they're not bribing each other as they were in the movie, but some of the dialogue was quite good when they talked about who wants to be Pope. Why would you want this? And then, some of the dialogue. But in any case, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tom, for being here, for spending this morning. You're always welcome. I know DC has been home for you for a long time, so please keep coming home. Thank you all. We'll see you in a couple of months for another activity.